sites which we had excavated for quite a duration of almost 15 years in between the two sites. These are the sites which are located, one in Kachchh and the other in the northern part of Saurashtra. Before I actually start my presentation, I would actually like to thank Ava for inviting me. Okay, sorry, it was not moving. I'm sorry, inviting me for this presentation, especially to Dr. Cameron. And also, I need to actually kind of acknowledge my thanks to a number of institutions and researchers who were part of these excavations and the subsequent research on intercivilization. First of all, the MS University of Baroda and all our colleagues, those who were part of the team which excavated both the sites, Shikarpur and Bagasra. The excavations at Shikarpur started in 1996. Sorry, the Bagasra started in 1996. This was continued later at Shikarpur, and then we completed our excavations at Shikarpur in 2014. So it's quite a prolonged period of time which we actually excavated these two sites. My colleagues like Professor Swarnavani, Professor K.K. Van, Professor K. Krishnan, Pratap Chandran, and many of our research students and friends, those who have actually kind of contributed in the excavations and subsequent research. And Archaeological Survey of India and State Archaeology Department for giving us permission and also financially helping us to carry out the excavations. And there are many other institutions those were actually involved in the studies, especially University of Wisconsin, Professor Mark Neuer, who has actually been part of the excavation, helping us to carry out a number of areas, especially recording and documentation of artifacts, and supporting many of our research and documentation programs, and also his students. And there are other institutions like the INTES project of the RIM, led by Professor Prasada and other members of that institute, and the NOGAT project, in which myself and Marco Medalla and myself were actually the co-directors, those who actually carried out research in North Gujarat. And they were also the researchers from this team. They were also part of this study, and it was also kind of financially supported by GHF, especially for the Harappan research, documentation and recording of artifacts and the remains from these two excavated sites. With that, sorry. Okay. All right. The two sites which I would actually be kind of talking about in order to understand the catastrophic event that actually kind of hit upon these in this region somewhere around 2200 or 2300 BC is Shikarpur and Bagasra. These two sites, in fact, are actually located on the southern extremity of the cultural domain of intercivilization, separate, and Bagasra is actually located on the southern shore of the Gulf of Kachchh. Across the Gulf of Kachchh, just 20 meters further north is Shikarpur. The importance of this site, in fact, that these are actually smaller settlements. We have several other settlements in this region, like Dholavira and Lothal, which are actually very well known, excavated extensively. These are much larger settlements, whereas these two settlements, in fact, are smaller settlements, also located very, very close, nearby. Any impact of the environmental calamities would probably affect equally in both the sites, in the sense that they are actually set in the same environmental context. So if you actually come across some evidence of the impact of this catastrophic climatic catastrophe at one site, one would therefore expect to come across that in the other site as well. That is exactly what we did by looking at the kind of evidence which we came across at Bagasra. That was a site which was excavated first in 1996 onwards. And then we actually looked at the kind of evidence which we came across at Bagasra. We actually kind of looked at the evidence, which whatever we have from Shikarpur, and then compare these two set of evidence to understand what does it actually tell us in terms of understanding the this episodical climatic catastrophe. Remember, this is not an extended climatic change, something like that. It could actually be in a kind of cloudburst or a kind of tsunami effect, which is quite episodical. It did had its impact. One could actually see some evidence of its impact at both the sides. That is exactly what I would actually kind of present today. So when we actually kind of, this is a map which actually shows the distribution of Harappan sites in Gujarat. When we actually look at the cultural affiliation of the sites, which are found in Gujarat, Gujarat has more than 750 Harappan affiliated sites. Some of them are, as I said, very large, some of them very, very small rural settlements. But what one can easily observe is that there are two kinds of sites, Harappan sites in Gujarat. The sites you come across in Saurashtra, in fact, are different from the sites you actually come across in Kachchh. Kachchh sites actually shows closer affinities with the what we call the classical Harappan, the kind of cultural traits, but which one may identify with the Indus Valley proper. These are actually rarely found in the Saurashtrian side. This shaded area essentially shows the geographical extension of the classical Harappan sites, and then beyond that, south of that shade, what you come across is the Surat Harappan, what one can actually call the regional features of the Harappa culture. The one site which actually stands out in this context is Lothal, which is actually in the heart of Saurashtra, but still shows the classical features. So it is this dynamics, cultural dynamics, one need to actually understand when we also look at when we also try to address the issues of climatic impact, because the kind of cultural development, Harappan cultural development, you actually come across in Gujarat is actually the dynamics between, or the interaction between these two cultural traditions, and they actually got impacted by this climatic events as well. So what we actually see is a resultant of all these aspects. So understanding the effect of this climatic calamities or the impact is integral in understanding the interaction between the classical Harappan sites which we come across in Kachchh, and also the Surat Harappan sites in Saurashtra. So that's the larger picture one would actually kind of see the evidence of climatic calamity. This is a picture which actually shows a general view of Bagasra, a small site measuring hardly 2 hectares, having hardly 2 hectares. But it actually has all the trappings of the so-called, not so-called, all the real, the classical Harappan, sites. It is fortified. It is all the cultural materials which one may associate with the Harappan civilization or Harappa culture. It actually shows the occupation, habitation actually starting from the urban phase, continuing in the post-urban phase. It actually has a 7.5 meters thick cultural deposit, and has been in general dated from 2500 BC to 1500 BC. That is a time span during which the site was actually occupied by the Harappans. So this is a schematic profile of the mound, wherein you can actually see the stratigraphic context of cultural remains at the site. The shaded area, highlighted area, are the sedimentary layers we would actually be referring to for understanding the impact of those catastrophic climatic event, which probably happened around in between 2300 BC and 2200 BC. Sorry. Yeah. that's a map which actually shows the plan of the ground plan of the Bagasra Harappan settlement. So the shaded area is the fortified part of the settlement. It has got a very thick wall measuring 7.75 meters at the base, and the top is around 5 meters, built of stone and mud bricks. And it also did have two gates, one on the eastern side and one on the southern side. And the southern half of the settlement, as you can see, we did not come across any evidence of a boundary wall that kind of protected the southern half of the settlement. So within the fort, what we actually come across very interesting evidence of a lot of workshops of the craftsmen, especially those of shell workshops or the bead workshops, or also the fanes. When I say bead workshop, the semi-precious stone beads as well as the fanes beads, and workshops of pottery and copper working are actually found outside the fortification. So primarily in the fortified area, what we actually come across is the organized, craft production. These are actually, production in large numbers. Whereas outside the fortified area, what we actually come across, in fact, is household production. So we do actually come across all stages of production of beads or shell bangles, etc., even outside, suggesting that there were household production going on outside the fortified area as well. Now, in order to understand this, the catastrophic event which you are actually kind of going to talk about, we need to actually understand the cultural sequence at the site. We have, this almost 7.5 meter cultural deposit has been divided into three phases, three sequential phases of cultural development. Primarily belong to the urban Harappan and the post-urban Harappan. But in the urban, we have actually three phases. The first phase is actually the beginning of habitation, represented by almost a 1 meter thick deposit, which has no evidence of fortification. The fortification starts in the second phase. So that's the criteria that has actually been used to understand the early stages and the subsequent. These are all happening in the urban phase. And then that's the second phase. Second phase actually continues, and then it actually got to the third phase, which has been actually kind of identified on the basis of predominance of these Surat Harappan, Saurashtrian cultural elements in the cultural material from that phase onwards. And the last phase is the post-urban phase, where the urban features completely disappear. So that is what the sequence of cultural development. This is important primarily because we will eventually connect the event, the catastrophic event, which we are actually going to talk about, with these phases of cultural development. So we do actually have a few radiocarbon dates to kind of support this the chronological cultural development site. What one can actually see is that the early urban phase, or the phase first, has been actually dated to around 2550 BC to 2400 BC. And the second phase, which is the time when the fortification actually started, that has been dated from 2400 BC to 2200 BC. And the third phase is once again belong to the urban phase, where you actually have classical Harappan along with the regional trade, that's the Surat Harappan. So the prominence of the Surat Harappan is actually treated as criteria for actually kind of understanding this cultural development. That actually starts from 2200, 2100 BC to 1900 BC. So after 1900 BC, the site was abandoned for a short period of time, only to be reoccupied a little later during the post-urban phase. And the post-urban habitation is actually found to be very patchy, confined to certain pockets alone, not entirely spread entirely over the mount, whereas the other phases, especially the phase 3 and phase 2, are all found spread throughout the mount in different trenches, which are actually put at different parts of the mount, actually indicate phase 2 and 3, in fact, are actually quite widely spread aside. Phase phase 3 is actually kind of confined to certain pockets. Now, this is a picture of the fortification wall, which actually shows the outer face of the fortification wall. Let me see whether it works. Okay, sorry. What you actually see here is at the bottom part is the phase first, and this. All right, where the person actually stands, in fact, is the top part of the early stages of the fortification, and on top of that, stone foundation, you actually have several courses of bricks which actually form the original wall. And where the person actually stands, from above that is the second phase of the fortification. And the calamity, the catastrophic climatic event which we are talking about, is actually associated with the second stage of this wall construction. So the wall essentially does not tell you nothing about this this event. In order to understand that, we need to actually look at the sediments which are actually accumulated against it, especially both inside the fortified area as well as the fortified area. I suppose the sediments which are found within the fortified area as well as outside the fortified area will actually reflect this event differently, primarily because the fortified area is actually well managed, whereas the unprotected part is most probably have a direct impact of the climatic event rather than in the protected part. So, I actually selected the 2 trenches from fortified area and 2 trenches which are located outside the fortified area for understanding the impact of this. First of all, to understand the impact of this climatic event and how did actually people coped up with this climatic event. So this is a deep trench which actually shows almost 20 sedimentary layers starting from the phase first. All right. So you can actually see the earlier part actually represents the phase first, and what we actually see in the highlighted area represented by layer 12, 11, and 10. This, while we were actually excavating, what we actually observed is that there is hardly any cultural material coming from there. It is a relatively uniform, yellowish, gravelly sand deposit. And this was kind of intriguing, essentially because while excavating through the upper levels, we do actually come across large number of cultural material, all of them primarily belonging to the urban phase of the Indus civilization. Suddenly, and you can see the thickness of this deposit is around 1 meter or more than 1 meter, 1.3 meters. And when you do not come across artifacts, there are a few artifacts, but very, very little. And the sediments there is no evidence of any kind of construction that was actually through this 1 meters. And then we actually become curious, what exactly was actually happening? Why is this? That is when we actually started looking at the other set of evidence to understand how this yellowish, gravelly, sandy deposit bereft of cultural material become part of the habitational sediment within the fortified area. Then we actually start looking at the construction of the site, construction of the wall. What we actually found is that this is essentially associated with a devastating event, which actually kind of eroded off many of the preceding habitational features, which also probably have impacted the wall. We did not come across any evidence of that event actually kind of destroying the wall at Bagasra. But then what we actually come across is that the destruction of my cursor is actually not working. I do not know how to kind of operate it. I'm sorry that my cursor is not working. All right, so Is anybody has any suggestion how to cursor work? But anyway, what actually happens here is that uh, the wall construction, the wall was actually reconstructed. First of all, the base of the wall was actually expanded after that calamitous event. And then the height was actually increased by adding more courses of both stone as well as the mud bricks. And it is at that point, in order to raise the working level, these sediments were most probably deliberately actually kind of laid in at these places. There are no actual evidence of fluvial activity within those sediments. There is no evidence of erosion, etc., which we could actually come across at least within that sediment, which are actually found in the fortified area. Which essentially suggests that these sediments are essentially the natural sediments which you come across in the vicinity of where the site is actually located. The same gravelly, yellowish, sandy sediments were actually brought in and filled it up, and immediately what you actually come across is that it did not actually result into an economic decline. People actually responded, well, and they kind of rebuilt the fortification wall and rebuilt the structures, and all the economic activities actually kind of restarted. In fact, many of the interesting evidence about the workshops of shell or semi-precious stone build workshops or the fence workshops which we actually came across are all coming from the layers which actually belong to the subsequent layers, that is 8th, 7th, and 6th. So in order to understand the nature of this sediment, how sterile this deposit is, whether the distribution of artifacts which you come across in different layers actually reflect this event, we actually looked at the relative abundance of some of the artifacts. The artifact which we selected for this with this purpose were two. One is the lithic blades, and the other is shell, because these are the most popularly found artifact at the site, starting from the early stages up to almost the end of period 3. In the post-urban phase, you do not necessarily come across all these artifacts. So we are essentially talking about this event belonging to the period 2. So we found these two artifacts can probably help us to understand or articulate the nature of the sediment, prior to this event and the post catastrophic event. So what we did was, this graph actually shows graphically shows this the distribution of those artifacts. Especially this is the one which we have from shell at the top, and the highlighted area is corresponding to the layers 12, 11, and 10 at EQ2 trench. So what one can see is there's a certain dip, in the relative abundance, and then you also see same behavior in the case of lithic blades, where it actually dips. And what is equally important is that after that dip, a resurrection, we can large number of both shell items as well as the lithic items which are actually found in the subsequent layers, suggesting that that event did not actually economically did not impact the site very badly. The site kind of responded very well, and then and all the economic activities actually started afresh, and then that is what it actually suggests. It actually suggests the resilience of the Harappans at Bagasra in spite of that calamitous event. So what you actually see it in here, in fact, is that this shell work, this one which you actually see here, actually belong to the first second phase, but then after that event, after that calamitous event, and similarly you have this evidence of this all these workshops stone bead production. These are all actually the found from the layers belonging to the essentially belonging to the post-calamity levels. And you also have this interesting evidence of Fane's workshops, so which are actually found near the fortification wall. What it actually suggests is that there was no economic impact in spite of that calamitous event. I just wanted to show you that these pictures to actually kind of show that the event which we are actually talking about did not actually badly did not actually result in the decline of the economic activities at the site. The other side which we actually looked at, in fact, is the other trench we actually looked at is just 10 meters further west of EQ2, which also show the similar kind of sediments. And as you can see, where you have these sediments, which is once again almost 1 meter thick and sterile, and same kind of sediment. But then immediately above that, you do come across structures actually being built. Once again, suggesting that the event did not actually badly impact the economic prowess of the site. And the same behavior in terms of artifact distribution can also be seen at the site, at this layer, at this trench as well in the case of blades, where you can see this, the layers 6 and 7 essentially represent the calamity hit layer. And what we see is the 6 and 7, there is a dip, and then there is an increase in the number of lithic grades which you come across the subsequent layers, probably suggesting the rebounding of the economic activities at the site. Now, when we actually move out of this fortified area, what we actually come across, in fact, is this is one of the trench which is located in the southern part of the mound, which is outside the fortified area. What we actually see is the structural remains after the impacted by that catastrophic calamity in the outer side of the fortified area. So that, in fact, is a picture which actually shows it. We actually do have the excavations actually kind of shown. We do actually have structural remains belonging to phase 2 and phase 1 at this trench, which has all been actually kind of eroded away, partially eroded away by this catastrophic event. So there is no evidence of erosion as far as the fortified area is concerned. There are good evidence of erosion, which one can actually see in the outside the fortified area, which essentially indicate that the impact of this calamity, this event, was more direct in the unprotected part than in the protected area. So this is a trench which actually shows that we selected a trench EO10 and EO6 in this area in order to understand how well one can actually kind of illustrate this the impact of this event. So what you can see is that you can actually see the remains of mud-based structure, the lower part of which actually shows the phase first, and the upper part of which actually shows phase 2 structures. And what you actually see is the layer 7, 6, and all, which actually is the deposit got deposited after the erosion. So that event actually kind of completely and partially eroded those structures, especially the phase 2 structures, and it also scored through the top of the phase 1 structures. I think I have another picture which actually shows this much better. You can actually see this, my cursor. Can you see my presentation? Yes? Okay.
We can see the movement now, Ajit. We can see your cursor moving.
Okay, I know. I was wondering how will I kind of. laser.
It's
Okay. Yeah, okay, so it's fine. I suppose I am not able to find the laser.
it's a little 2 or 3 more up. If you go up a little bit higher, it's down 2.
This one? No,
Like,
laser point. Yeah.
There you go.
I'm sorry for my clumsiness. Anyway, so this is, yeah, what you can actually see is that this is the top part of the eroded part of the those structural remains belong to phase. This one is belong to phase 1, and this is actually belong to the phase 2. One is built over the other, and you can actually see the eroded top to phase 2, and here it's actually kind of scoring through the top of the phase 1 structure as well. And all those deposits which you actually see in here are erosional deposit, primarily habitation. Here you do not actually come across those yellowish, what we call the gravelly sandy deposit. This is essentially the habitational debris being eroded and redeposited, after after the calamity actually took place. We can actually see that. So now the curve now, okay, it moves now. Sorry. All right. So what you can actually see is this where my cursor actually moves. This actually shows the collapse of the structures because of that calamity event, because of that climatic event, which actually kind of led to the collapse of all those structures. And you can see the unevenness of the surface, suggesting that there is these remains were completely eroded away, probably through floods, and then and subsequently all these sediments were actually deposited. And what you can actually see is that these are all primarily redeposited habitational debris, not the yellowish concrete deposit, which are deliberately kind of put there in order to raise the level. That is the difference between how the fortified area is actually maintained, how people living outside actually kind of responded to that, to this disastrous event. And you do not actually come across at this part of the habitation, you do not actually come across immediate reconstruction of the structures. You do come across slightly later. You can actually see some flimsy structures actually started coming up. That too actually belong to the early part of the phase 3. Phase 3 is actually dated to around 2200 BC. 2200 BC. That is when you actually come across new structures, actually brick structures actually started coming up, suggesting that the same site actually kind of showed different response to how they actually dealt with the impact of this climatic event. And the same thing, we actually did the distribution of artifacts at these sites, at this trench, to understand how does it actually behave. What one can see is that the layer 6, which is actually the one which shows us all the debris, where you can see a sudden dip in the number of artifacts that are actually found in them. This is quite dicey, primarily because it is a cultural debris which has been refilled there. So you do essentially come across many of those artifacts in that. So even if you come across a large number of artifacts within that redeposited debris, is quite natural. So with this was not a sediment which was taken from outside and kind of used for filling up those eroded parts of the habitation. Okay. So the last trench, which is located outside the fortification, the second trench actually, which we actually looked at to understand this the impact of this calamity, whether it is actually how widely spread disease at the site, is ER13, which is one of the deepest trenches. You can see the highlighted area, the layers actually kind of represent that event here. Very thick deposit, somewhere around 1.6 meters in thickness, and mostly of collapsed material, including a lot of brick pads, suggesting the enormity of that climatic disastrous event. The evidence from all these trenches actually suggest that the calamity actually kind of hit the site uniformly. Its evidence is actually found in most of the trenches which we excavated at the site. It did not actually lead to the decline of the economic activities at the site. In fact, economic activities revived soon after. This included new structural constructions and rebuilding of the fort wall. So that is actually important. What's also important is that it is soon after when they actually kind of reached building these structures, the layers which are actually associated with the post-calamity event actually started incorporating more and more number of Surat Harappan elements. In the layers, for example, 10 and 9 and 10 and 8 in the EQ2, with the first trend which we have seen, they are actually very few. As you go up, the number actually increases. They become more dominant in the layers 6 and 7, which essentially is the period 3. So what one can see is that the impact, the calamitous event did not have an impact upon the economic activities, but at the same time, it actually is reflected that the more closer interaction between the two regions, the Surat Harappans and the classical Harappan, which is actually reflected in the increasing number of the Surat Harappan trades in the subsequent layers after the calamity. The other side, the second side, which we actually looked at to understand the impact of this calamity. First of all, are there any evidence of this calamity at all? And if at all there, what in fact is the nature of the evidence? The site, as I said, is actually located just 20 meters further north of Bagasra. Very similar to, in terms of Harappan occupation, quite similar. It actually shows urban and the post-urban habitation. It has got almost 6 meters of, more than 6 meters of cultural deposit. It's much larger than Bagasra, though it measures somewhere around 4.5 hectares. That is almost double of Bagasra. And even the fortified area is almost three times larger than Bagasra. The site is actually dated. We have few radiocarbon dates, which actually dated almost at the same time, probably slightly later as far as the radiocarbon date goes, 2450 BC to 1500 BC. Okay, that is an aerial view of Shikarpur site, which is actually located just 500 meters away from the Gulf of Kachchh, a creek of the Gulf of Kachchh. It is just 7 meters above the modern current sea level. And that, in fact, the plan of the site. As I said, this is a slightly larger settlement, fortified. The fortification is almost 10 meters thick, so entirely made of mud bricks. Whereas at Bagasra, both stone and mud bricks are actually used for fortification. Whereas here it has got an inner fortification or inner boundary wall, as well as an outer fortification or outer boundary wall, which is the outer fortification is not found at Bagasra. So there are some differences and there are a lot of similarities. But what is more important is that at Shikarpur, we do not have the same set of evidence indicating mass production of any of the craft items, no fans, no shell items, no semi-precious stone beads, but you do actually come across household production, which is spread both within the fortified area as well as outside fortified area. It also has a unique feature as a central open square, which was actually used for both economic as well as most probably other social activities as well. When talking about we have these radiocarbon dates from the site. As you can actually see, there are no dates for phase 3. So we have phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 2 start from 2200 BC to 2200 BC and later. Phase 1 has actually been dated from 2470 to 2200 BC. So both urban and post-urban habitation, in the early part, the phase first, which actually shows only classical Harappan, and whereas the phase 2 actually shows it belong to the urban, both classical Harappan and Harappan. So this is very similar to what we actually come across at Bagasra in terms of cultural materials, which we actually come across both the sides. And then obviously post-urban is once again confined to certain pockets, especially in the southern part of the mount, not entirely found spread everywhere at the site. That's a trend which actually kind of shows index trend, which actually shows all the 3 phases of habitation. So the first phase, as you can see from the natural sediments up to almost layer 9 belongs to the first phase. And the second phase is actually very small, almost 1.5 to 2 meters. Belong to the urban phase, but you do actually come across the Surat Harappan elements in here. Phase 3 is flimsy, as you can actually see here, just 20 centimeters, found mostly in pits, etc. But you do also come across a lot of structural remains at the site. Now, what evidence which we have to understand the catastrophic event which we are actually talking to from this trench, especially the layer 6, which you can actually see a very thick layer measuring almost more than in here it actually measures around 50 to 60 centimeters, but as you go further down on the other side, it actually measures more than 1.5 meters. The sedimentary features of this yeah, I'll come to that sedimentary features a bit later. Before I actually talk about the calamity, the evidence of the calamity at this particular trench, I will talk a bit about the cultural affiliation of different layers. It is from the layer 12 onwards, we actually come across evidence of the Surat Harappan. Very few artifacts, belong to Surat Harappan are actually found. As you move up in the sediments, in the sedimentary layers, the number of the Surat Harappan elements actually increases, and it is from the 5th layer onwards that what we call the period 2. We actually do have, the Surat Harappan traits actually become really dominant along with the classical Harappan. So in that way, both Bagasra and Shikarpur actually show almost a similar kind of cultural dynamics between the classical Harappan and the Surat Harappan or the Saracen Harappan elements. So this is the layer which I was actually referring to, layer 6, which actually shows, as you can see, this kind of dips down like that, and this entire deposit, in fact, was actually kind of deliberately filled in by the people at Harappa. So much so that what you can actually see is that the sediments are quite almost bereft of many of those artifacts, Harappan artifacts. It is the same yellowish, gravelly, sandy deposit which we actually come across as a natural sediment within the vicinity of the site. And these are the structures which are actually belonging to the early part of the phase 2, where the structures in the phase 2 were actually built of a stone. Prior to that, most of the structures were actually built of, in the phase first structures were all built of bricks, following the classical Harappan tradition, whereas in the classical Harappan tradition, especially in Saurashtra, and then we have this stone being used as a construction material predominantly by the Saurashtrian side, and you actually come across that being actually kind of becoming popular in the early part of phase 2 or at this particular site. So this deposit is actually something around about 1.3 meters. This is what it actually kind of shows the the same kind of evidence of that actually kind of hit the site at Shikarpur. Okay, so that you can actually see the drawing of that section where you can see layer 6 and 7 having yellowish sandy gravel, having very few artifacts, essentially represents the deliberate filling up of the site in order to probably raise the or to level the the impact of that event, which badly destroyed the site, the fortified part of the site of Shikarpur. You can see this has actually kind of destroyed many of these mud brick structures. That event has actually destroyed many of the mud brick structures, which could not be actually used. But what is also interesting, in fact, is that you do actually come across the impact of this, the calamity, kind of breaching the fort wall. This was not actually found at Bagasra. So if you actually look at this, this is the fortification wall, the inner face of the fortification wall. This line actually shows how the fortification was actually kind of completely eroded away by most probably by that catastrophic a flood probably. It's probably only the flood which can actually kind of remove such huge. Remember, this fortification wall is around 10 meters in thickness, and it has been completely kind of washed off. And this, what is more important is that it was actually kind of repaired subsequently and also immediately, suggesting that this site also shows that there was the event did not actually affect very badly in the economic activities of the site. So you can see the repair work, the kind of bricks which are actually used are of different color, the mortar used are of different, suggesting that the wall was actually breached and it was subsequently kind of repaired by the Harappans. And this was all actually happening in the period 2, somewhere around 2200 BC, but probably slightly earlier than 2200. But you can actually see the way it has been actually kind of the crater which has been actually formed because of this this event, and which was subsequently filled up by the habitation debris. And just exactly opposite, this is the southern wall, southern side of the fortification wall. In the northern fortification wall, you actually see exactly a very similar kind of destruction, suggesting that the flood, in fact, actually kind of ran through the site, destroying the southern wall as well as the northern wall. We will go to that site. This is the northern wall, fortification wall, almost 10 meters in thickness, and you can actually see you can actually see this is the destruction which it has actually caused. Very irregular. It has been actually filled in by the brick material, and then reconstructed. As you can see up above that, you have new bricks which have been added as a repair work. So it essentially suggests that there's a breach in the wall, and that actually corresponds to both in time and in direction with what we are seeing in the southern wall. So what we are actually referring to, the one and the same event, which kind of flooding through the site and destroying both southern wall and the northern wall. And the ES for the trench which we have seen is actually in the middle of the path of this destruction. That is where we actually come across the area was actually deliberately filled in by the inhabitants to level the ground. So this is what you actually see, the kind of repair work you actually see at the site. You can see this is the wall which has been actually kind of repaired. So you can see the different kinds of bricks which have been actually used for the repair work, and also the different kinds of mortar that has actually been used, suggesting and this actually happened that post-calamity. As a post-calamity event. So we actually have more direct evidence of this event actually hitting the Shikarpur on the fortification wall. And as I actually suggested, there is no economic decline which we could actually see even at Shikarpur after this this event. This structure which you see here, which has got a stone foundation and brick top, all belong to phase 2. All of them actually belong to phase 2, built somewhere around 2200 BC, suggesting that the economic parameters of the site was actually quite sound. They could actually invest in a kind of rebuild the structures, rebuild the fortification wall, and the economic activities actually went on as it was earlier, prior to the calamity event. But these are two sites which are actually located very nearby. One was actually wondering whether it was just a local event, or it was of a regional scale. It is at that time we actually kind of started discussing about this aspect with excavators, from Dholavira and Kanmir, in fact, are two major sites in Kachchh. Kanmir is very nearby, around further north of Shikarpur, whereas Dholavira is around 100 kilometers further north. But this one, my discussion with one of the team members of the Dholavira excavation, Mr. Y.S. Rawat, who was actually the director of archaeological state archaeology department, who was part of he himself, in our personal discussion, he actually kind of suggested that he also did actually kind of observe these aspects while excavating the site at Dholavira. And this is the picture which I have taken from the recently published paper on Dholavira, 2019. The event which we are actually talking about would actually be this one, which has been highlighted. I have highlighted in the yellow, which what one can see is that a thick sediment made up of gravel and sand. I do not know what color it was, but what is interesting is that it's actually dated to 4,300 years, that is 2,300 BC, which is almost coeval with the event which we are actually talking about at Bagasra and Shikarpur. So what it actually suggests, and my discussion with Dr. Jeevan Karagwal, who excavated Kanmir, he also did actually kind of that a similar kind of sediment, similar kind of features have been observed while excavating the site at Kanmir, which would essentially suggest that the event which we are actually talking about may not be a local one. It could have been actually kind of a regional one, which would actually affect sites which are actually located 1,000 kilometers apart. Not 1,000, sorry, 100 kilometers apart. Shikarpur and Bagasra, Shikarpur and Dholavira are 100 kilometers apart. So this could be of a regional nature, and it could be of a very large scale event that could actually kind of partially or completely destroyed many of the structures, existing structures of the site, and which actually resulted into the reconstruction of the settlement anew. And both at Shikarpur as well as at Bagasra, along with the Dholavira and Kanmir, one can actually see that it did not actually result into the decline of the economic activity. The impact, in fact, was much less felt in the economic activities. Probably their economy was quite sound, so that they could actually kind of reconstruct, rebuild the structures anew and continue with their economic activities. So in order to, let me now actually kind of sum up what we have actually quite briefly discussed. It would actually suggest that this climatic event we are discussing was not a local event, as I actually just mentioned. That's primarily because you do come across evidence of very similar evidence at sites which are located far off from both Bagasra and Shikarpur. It certainly was a regional nature, regional scale. We do not know it had an impact in Saurashtrian site as well. This is something which has not actually been kind of looked at. Probably it would actually be worthwhile to look at the Saurashtrian site to understand, especially those sites which are located close to Kachchh coast, to understand whether it had its impact on the Saurashtra Harappan sites, which are located in Saurashtra or not. In terms of stratigraphic evidence, event happened somewhere prior to 2200 BC. This is important because 2200 BC is often regarded as the the onset of the climatic decline, which coincides with the Magellan event, where the climate become progressively arid. That had its impact on the Harappan culture development. What we actually see it in here is that this event actually happened somewhere around 2200 BC, essentially slightly earlier than 2000, slightly maybe 100, 50 years, or in between 150 years, 50 years earlier than 2200 BC, or around 2200 BC. And then the revival actually happens after 2200 BC. So the Magellan event actually, is not actually reflected immediately in the cultural development at least at these sites. It is only somewhere around 2100 BC we actually come across the onset of an economic decline, not before 2100 BC. It is around 2100 BC we actually see most of the urban ethos actually become obsolete, and then the Zoroastrian elements actually started predominating by around 2100 BC. The earlier urban structures were continued to be used. No new extensive construction actually happened after 2100 BC, suggesting that there was an economic decadence which was actually happening after 2100 BC, not immediately after 2200 BC. And that actually continues up to 1900 BC, and after 1900 BC the sites were actually abandoned, but many of the sites were actually reoccupied after a small gap. But then those sites have completely changed the character and nature. They become more rural. The urban lifestyle was not affordable. That in fact is the nature of cultural development which we actually come across in the Harappan sites in Gujarat. Yeah, so that is all about my presentation. Thanks for your patience. If you have any questions, I will actually kind of try to answer those questions.
Thank you so much, Ajit. I'm clapping. There are other silent claps, but yellow indicated claps from members of the audience. Thank you so much. It was a very compelling and challenging presentation. I was very interested in your point about the shift to the rural lifestyle, or the increase in the Surat Harappan material and other sorts of things. And I think it's very interesting in terms of what the sorts of things we've been working on in northwestern India and Haryana and Punjab. So yeah, there's lots of things I would like to talk about, but I'm very keen not to dominate the questions. But there are some questions that have come through. So if anybody would like to add any questions, there's two options. If you could either type your question into the chat, or raise your hand, and we can go to let you ask the question directly. So there's a question or two from Shikar. Would you like to ask the question yourself?
I can actually read the question.
Yeah, I can read the question and you can answer. How about that? So,
whichever.
Yeah, the first question is, can we say that the people of this region utilize the calamity as an opportunity to build on more local integration?
That's an interesting way of actually looking at the whole event. you can actually look at it in many different ways. If you actually look at the way the people at Bagasra and Shikarpur kind of rebuilt the structures, as well as economic activities actually continue to be without much of a change. In fact, actually flourished. Many of the seals and ceilings, which become, not all, many of them actually found in the post-calamity layers, suggesting that there is no economic impact at all. So this would actually suggest, essentially suggest that people actually use this as an opportunity. That's the way one can actually look at. What is more important, in fact, is that they probably did have the economic prowess to kind of overcome this in a setback. And they could actually kind of invest those resources for rebuilding both the economy as well as the structural settlement. In the hindsight, one can actually say they did actually use it as an opportunity to kind of make good progress in those areas of cultural activities as well as economic activities. Yes.
Thank you. There's a follow-up question, which is about whether or not you could
tell something about the social construct of Harappans, what kind of social system they have. Unfortunately, that's an intangible aspect of the Harappa culture. It's not so very easy to answer in black and white what in fact the social structure of the Swarat Harappan, how actually they differed from the classical Harappans. What one can actually kind of tell you is that there are a lot of differences in the material culture between the two. That would probably suggest there will be some differences in the social structure as well. For instance, the Swarat Harappans essentially used the kind of more bowls and those kind of pots, with the Harappans actually, the classical Harappans rarely actually used. This is essentially because of the kind of cuisines with both the classical Harappans and the Swarat Harappan essentially consumed. Now we know that the Swarat Harappan's staple food was based on millets, whereas the classical Harappans were actually based on wheat and barley. So there is differences in the cuisines. And one can always imagine there would have been actually kind of the differences in the languages which they actually spoke, because you do actually come across different languages even today spoken in different regions. In Saurashtra or in Gujarat, there's different languages. As you go further north in Sindh or in Punjab, you have different languages. More than that, you also do come across differences in the way they actually kind of visualized and constructed their settlements and structures. And then the building materials which are actually used for the construction also varied. So there are a lot of differences, but at the same time, they certainly did actually share a lot of common things. That is, I suppose these are mostly intangible things. That is what actually make them part of the Harappan cultural development. Yes.
Thank you, Ajit. It's really interesting. I've often felt that the Harappan settlements in Gujarat are probably the strongest indication of some degree of, there's an aspect of colonialism in terms of the way that the settlements interact in those areas. And so that fits with what you're saying in a sense, that they're notably very overtly different populations, which is not necessarily the same as what we see everywhere else. It's really very interesting. So there's some follow-up questions. Adam Green has put his hand up. There was a question that came into the chat before, which was a question from Aftab Alam asking whether or not there was any copper artifacts from Bagasra, or whether or not there was any copper metalworking at Bagasra.
We have a lot of copper artifacts we found from Bagasra as well as from Shikarpur. We have some evidence to suggest copper working was actually carried out at Bagasra. We did actually find some fragments of crucibles that were probably used for melting the metal. I think these are still being studied. There are some evidence to suggest copper working was actually carried out at Bagasra, and this was actually, most of the evidence were actually confined to outside the fortified area. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Adam, would you like to ask your question?
Adam, yeah.
Yes, thank you, sir. It's a wonderful talk. It's very interesting.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if I'd like to invite. I'd be curious as to whether there were significant economic changes in the households outside the fortifications at Bagasra or at Shikarpur.
Yeah, we did actually kind of carried out a study to understand were there any kind of significant difference in the material remains which you actually come across in the within the fortified area and outside of the fortified area. Primarily, there isn't much of a difference. The difference is essentially in degrees, not essentially in quality-wise. You have a large number of those materials which are actually found in the fortified area, whereas very few of them are actually found outside the fortified area. Every important craft items which we actually talk about is actually found in both the sites, in weights or even the seals. For example, we have seals and ceilings which are found outside the fortified area, but large number, almost we have 9 seals from Shikarpur, Bagasra. 2 of them are actually found outside the fortified area. Now, the remaining 7 are found within the fortified area. So, in that sense, the difference essentially is in terms of numbers and degrees, rather than in qualitative. There is not much of a qualitative difference. But then most of the organized craft activities were actually carried out, which is essentially for mass production of these craft items, were actually carried out within the fortified area, whereas the small scale activities were carried out outside. That is probably the reason you come across all these, all those cultural materials found in both inside and outside the fortified area. Yes, Adam.
Thank you. So there's another question that's been asked. Shikar asked another question, which I think you've already answered, which was about the difference between, you talked about millet and barley, which I think is very interesting. But Zakir Khan asked a question which it actually fits with a question I was wondering. In a sense, your explanation of the catastrophe is actually quite interesting. So it makes the point about the fact that Gujarat is in some respects an arid region, but it also gets monsoon rain. So could you just talk a little bit about in terms of explaining your idea about the cause of the catastrophe? You mentioned flood several times, but you also, how do you think it fits flood and aridity and those 2 aspects?
Yeah, yes, Cameron. This is an interesting thing. Obviously, Gujarat is actually located in an arid region, semi-arid region. We don't actually associate it the continuous monsoonal rains in here, but then we also do come across occasional episodic cloudbursts, which actually results into devastating effects, which actually results into the complete erosion of roads, buildings, etc. The recent one, which you actually seen just a year back, where we were actually excavating in Kachchh, and then when we came back, the entire area, when we came back in the next year, we saw that the entire area was completely kind of washed off, as there was a heavy rain, a cloudburst, resulting into flash floods. So this is what exactly I kind of mentioned. Now, flash floods are actually certainly not are local. You don't come across they being actually happening the entire Kachchh. So what we have actually discussed, in fact, is that this was a much larger scale event. So I would actually imagine this would have been this should not have been just a cloudburst. I would imagine the event was the catastrophic flood event. It is only the flood which can actually kind of erode those structures. Earthquakes cannot actually kind of erode those structures. They will actually kind of slump them down, bury them, but would not actually kind of erode them. So that's what we see outside the fortified area at Bagasra, as well as the fortification walls at Shikarpur has been completely kind of breached and eroded off. That could actually happen because of the flood. And what actually caused that flood is something one need to actually investigate. It could be in an episodical heavy rain, as it happens even today, resulting into what is known as the landslides, etc. It could also be a tsunami event, which could actually affect much in a much larger scale in a larger area, since it is actually kind of affecting Dolavira or Bagasra and Shikarpur. It could actually be caused by a tsunami event. But then there is no way one can actually kind of confirm what actually would be the reason of this the enormous flood. I mean, I would probably be more confident to say it is an enormous flood. And what actually caused the flood is actually something which one cannot actually be very sure.
Okay, thank you. There's a related question which has come from Francesc Conesa. You actually partly answered the question in your comment about whether or not it's possibly an earthquake. Do you want to ask it, Franz, or are you satisfied that it's been answered?
Yeah, no, I'm just satisfied. Yeah, I was just wondering that given the seismicity of the area, there could be also some elements of earthquakes, of earth movements that could have caused this wall destruction and wall repairs. Thank you.
Yes, Francis, I may add to that we actually did not come across telltale evidence of earthquake in our excavation at both the sites. I suppose it has been actually found at, I'm told, if I remember correctly, it has been found at Dolavira. The earthquake as such probably does not actually result into the kind of erosional features which you actually see at these sites. That is what the reason one would actually kind of think of. And as you said very correctly, this is a seismologically very, very sensitive region where earthquakes are relatively common. The last major one actually happened in 2001. Yeah.
Thank you.
When you were speaking, Ajit, you mentioned that a lot would be learned from the sort of geoarchaeological evidence. So that actually fits in a sense in terms of the explanation. I mean, so Vn Prabhakar has mentioned the new information. Well, the suggestion about an event at Dolavira was a new interpretation. And he's asking whether Dr. Rawat would have an opinion on this or throw light on it. But maybe that's a sort of an open question in a sense.
Yeah.
But
can I answer that?
Yeah, sure,
just respond to that question. Yes, Prabhakar, I was actually discussing about this with Rawat because he was involved with the excavation at the site, and we did extensively discuss on this. And then I was actually going through the papers, and I actually saw this, the illustration about the stratigraphic features at the site, which actually shows that gravel deposit, which is dated around 2300 BC. I thought that I therefore actually thought that is the event probably Rawat also would be actually kind of referring to. Sure enough, there would actually be more such evidence. The site actually lived for almost 1,000 years. It is not just one calamity event that actually hit the site. It must have been actually hit. I'm pretty sure. I mean, even at Bagasra, we can actually see in the end of first phase, there was an event which actually showing a similar kind of feature. So certainly there will be, you can actually come across evidence of such events periodically hitting at the site. And I took up this because this actually dated around 2300, in between 2300 and 2200 BC, which is much more obvious than the other events as far as the evidence, stratigraphic evidence actually goes. Yes, Rawatji, if he is Dr. Rawat is actually here, he can actually kind of add upon if you may like to.
Would you like to say something, Dr. Rawat? You're welcome to unmute yourself and maybe answer some questions. Connecting. still can't hear you yet.
We cannot hear him.
It's just connecting. Now it should be connected now. Can you, oh, no, off. I don't think I can make you unmuted, unfortunately. Doesn't seem to be lucky just yet. Maybe if we keep trying, but there is another question.
Yes.
So there's a question from Marc Lebeau about the tsunami hypothesis, and this is perhaps also connected to the geoarchaeological evidence. So is there any traces of shells or mollusks that may have been deposited from a flood, or anything coming from the sea rather than from the land?
Interesting observation. The sediments which you are actually talking about, in fact, especially within the fortified area, were deliberately brought in to fill up the and make the level even, after the collapse had actually happened. But the effect of the tsunami could actually be seen outside the fort. Effect of that erosional event could actually be seen outside the fortified area, which is actually filled up with the habitational debris. All right, which has been completely eroded away, and the new deposit actually kind of got deposited within that eroded part. So we actually do not have any such evidence of marine mollusks, etc. Moreover, these sediments were actually not looked upon to understand this aspect yet. This is just the beginning of an observation, the beginning of a study, beginning of an observation which we were actually made. And I think more studies need to be done in order to understand how exactly one can actually go about in understanding the effect of this event.
Okay, thank you. I think we've sort of come towards the end of the general. Okay. VM Prabhakar has added a final comment with regard to, he's saying he feels that the section, I'm presuming it's the section that's visible now, is an oversimplified version of the excavated areas. Dr. Bisht definitely refers to a massive deposit towards the end of stage 3B, and I don't remember any such deposits during stage 4. There is actually visible, there's sand filling marked on the section in stage 3B on that illustration.
This one.
Yes, indeed.
This is pretty all right. This is what I actually said. I have actually looked at these sediments. This is actually much earlier. It's actually going back to almost 2600 BC. That is where in fact there is no radiocarbon date for it. So we are certainly not referring to that event at all. At Bagasra and Shikarpur. That's what I said. One can actually come across more such evidence, more such events in hitting upon different sites. Whereas you do actually come across. I'm not the one who actually drawn this section. This I think is drawn on the basis of what has been actually presented to the researchers, and this is a sediment which is mostly made up of sand and gravel, and actually kind of fit into 2300 BC, 2200 BC. More than that, Bagar, in my discussion with Robert, he was actually kind of agreeing with the kind of sediments which he also did come across, and obviously the date was not something which we actually discussed extensively. Yeah.
Excellent. I'm going to post the link to that publication into the chat. So in case anybody would like to have a look at the publication by Sengupta et al. It used to be fully open access, and it was published, I think, in hard copy last year. So it's still relatively new. But I think anyone that would like to follow up. I mean, this is clearly a provocative topic, and I think it's extremely interesting to hear this sort of synthetic discussion of the possibilities of what's happening. It's extremely interesting also to hear that there's a lot of recovery and local interaction taking place in Gujarat. So I think it would be nice to draw things to a close. I would like to thank you all for joining us. I'm sorry that Dr. Rawat, you weren't able to make your microphone connect, but it's been great to see you all. With any luck, we'll have another seminar next week for the Arwa Greater Indus series, but I haven't yet got it confirmed. So I'm going to be contacting you all again. Should it be going ahead, you'll receive an email from me in the coming days. Otherwise, there are 2 other seminars that will be occurring in November. You'll again be getting emails in due course. But thank you very much, everyone. And